Hello, and welcome back to my Disney Infinity 3.0 Battle at the Sarlacc Pit series. In this video, we will set up all of the necessary logic for the challenge maker. I've already placed all the creativitoys that we need, starting with the challenge maker here from the creativitoys drawer. We have 3 logic gates here that will control the various phases of the challenge maker. Have a time delayer, a text displayer, a logic and creativitoy, a blue team activator, a trigger area to start the challenge, a trigger area over the Sarlacc Pit, which we'll place down inside the Sarlacc Pit later. This is for the failed challenge logic if your character falls into the Sarlacc Pit. Also from the gameplay toys drawer, we have the sound effects generator and the boombox. I've also placed a locator up here in the center of the stationary skiff with the blue dot facing forward. That's where the character will spawn when the challenge is started. Go ahead and do a new locator connection, and we'll hook this up to the challenge maker. All player 1 or blue team. And then in the properties, start location, we'll select all players at one location. And then on our trigger area, you can see how I sized that there. When entered by player any, come back to the challenge maker and we will start the game. Also off the challenge maker, we'll do a new logic connection. When the invites are accepted, we will input into this first logic gate. And new logic connection, when the challenge is started, we will input into the second challenge maker. And finally, a new logic connection when the game is ended, which will also cover for when the game is completed or failed. We will input into this third logic gate. Okay, on our first logic gate for invites accepted on output, we'll come over here and change our music in the epic category to the Pitted Carcoon Sail Barge Assault. And on this third one for when the game is ended, new logic connection on output, we'll come back over to the boombox and we'll turn it off. And the music will return just to the normal Tatooine music for this Twin Sun Sky Dome. Back to our first one, new logic connection on output. Come to our blue team activator, and we will set all players to the blue team. And back to the third one for when the game is ended, new logic connection on output. Let's go back to our blue team activator. And we will clear all players from teams. Using the blue team activator so that if you're doing 2 players, you won't damage each other inadvertently with your attacks. Okay, on this target on our escape skiff, we'll do that is connected to the path there. Do a new logic connection. When hit, we'll come over here to this logic gate that controls the explosion sequence of destroying Jabba's sail barge, and we will do an input to that. So when that target is hit on the escape skiff, we start the destruction explosion sequence of the sail barge for the end game. Now, when the players are battling on this skiff, we also don't want this target to be hit and start the explosion sequence inadvertently. That's kind of what I'm showing here. So we need to prevent that. So we're going to come back over here, because we previously pulled all this logic underground, to our level starter. And we're going to do a new logic connection from the level starter on catalyze. Come back over to the logic gate that controls the explosion sequence, and we're going to close it. So when the toy box loads, that gate is closed, which now means when you're fighting on that skiff, if that target is inadvertently hit, you won't start the explosion sequence. We do want this to happen when the escape skiff moves to this point and stops. So when the point is reached by the object on the path, we'll come back over to our explosions logic gate, and we will reopen that gate. That'll now allow the player to hit the target and begin the explosion sequence. This is our reset logic gate. So here we want to do a new logic connection on output. And we're going to close that gate again. So once the game has been reset to play again, we want that explosions logic gate to be closed, so that once again we don't inadvertently hit or cause the explosion sequence if we hit that target. So as an added measure of protection, when the escape skiff gets here to its end of its path while it's making its escape, we will select this path point, and we'll go ahead and do a new logic connection. When the point is reached by the object on the path, in this case the escape skiff has reached the end of its escape path, we'll also come back over to our explosions logic gate and select close. That's a little bit of double protection for when the game is ended, as well as when the escape skiff reaches its point. The whole point of this is to make sure that we don't corrupt the replayers by sending a signal to them when the playback has already occurred. Okay, we also want to be very careful not to corrupt our replayers when the game is ended, completed, or failed. So we need to be careful when we send a reset signal to this master reset logic gate. We don't want to send a signal to it until after the explosion sequence is already completed. So we need to protect the replayers by having this logic gate only open after the explosion sequence has occurred. So we're protecting these replayers from being corrupted. As well as we don't want to produce more than one Jabba the Hutt at the same time. Otherwise you'll be pushing them out the back of the sail barge. So on our level starter, we'll do new logic connection catalyze. We're going to close our master reset logic gate when the game loads, or when the toy box loads actually. We will reopen that logic gate when the escape skiff has stopped at this point alongside our stationary skiff. So new logic connection when the point is reached by the object on the path. We'll come back over to our master reset logic gate, and this is when we want this to be opened. Just very similar to that's when we opened up the explosions logic gate. This trigger area will control the challenge failure logic, and you see how I've sized it to fit over top of the opening. So when entered by player any, we will come over to this text creator and we'll create a message here under loss, and I liked "so disappointing." Just a little bit of humor there to taunt the player a little bit for having fallen into the Sarlacc Pit. On the properties, I'll set the text duration to 4 and the text style to banner. Here we'll do a new logic connection when any text is dismissed. We'll come over to our challenge maker and select game failed. Also do a new logic connection when entered by any, so this will include player or enemies that get knocked into the Sarlacc Pit. We'll come over to our sound effects generator and we'll make a scream. So under the vocal category, scroll down until we find the classic scream and we'll select that one. And the properties here, we'll turn the 3D sound off, and just to so it's not overly powerful scream, I reduce my volume to 20. It's still quite loud even at 20. Now we can take our trigger area and I'm going to pull it down inside the Sarlacc Pit about 1 block below the surface of the terrain. And it fills up the entire opening of the Sarlacc Pit. So that takes care of our failed game logic. Alright, we also need to reset the plank when the game is ended, completed, or failed on our stationary skiff. We want that to be retracted back to its original starting position. So that's the plank that moves along the path there. So we'll come to our third logic gate here for our game ended logic, and we will select new logic connection on output, and I've already pulled this other logic gate below the terrain here, and I'm going to input into this logic gate, which is the logic gate that controls the reset logic for through these two path creators for our extendable plank. So that will send a signal to those two path creators to reset and stop and retract the plank so that it's back in its starting position if the game has been ended, either because the player ended it, completed it, or failed it. Okay, the next thing we're going to set up is using this time delayer. We're going to set up the logic for successfully completing the game. So come down to the properties and I'm going to set this delay time to 10 seconds. And the completing the game logic will run through that time delayer. So when the escape skiff moves and stops at this point, it'll trigger this camera to follow it along this path as we make our escape. Once the skiff and the camera get to the end of the path, it'll trigger this camera to go around this full 360-degree panoramic path. And when it gets to this far point over here, which is 3/4 of the way around this circular path, we're going to start that time delayer. So on this particular path point, we'll do a new logic connection. When the camera or the point reached by object on path, we'll come back over here to the time delayer and we'll start this 10-second delay. So go ahead and select start delay. When the delay has been started, we'll do another new logic connection, delay completed. come back to the camera, and we are going to deactivate this camera. This does a couple of things. It means that the player doesn't have to hit the escape button on your controller to stop the camera view. And with the 10-second delay, it gives you about 5 seconds at this end path point to view the debris field before the game is completed. So we'll come back to our 10-second time delayer, and once again we'll do a new logic connection. When the delay is completed, we'll come over to our challenge maker, and we can say complete the game. So this will be for a successful completion of the challenge. Alright, the last thing we need to do is have our reset logic set up. So we want to reset the logic after we've completed the game, and we only want to send reset signals to restore the debris field and the sail barge if the game has been successfully completed. So we're going to use this logic and gate. So auto reset, going to leave that off. And we're going to need two pieces of information for this to happen. So one is new logic connection when the game has been completed. We can input to this logic and. Next thing is when the player comes back and re-enters this trigger area that starts the challenge, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We will send a second input to this logic and. Now on logic and, new logic connection, when those two inputs are complete, we're going to come over here and down below the train to our master reset logic gate, which is currently open, and we will input into that logic gate. And that will reset the sail barge and the debris field. It'll also return the escape skip to its starting position there. On the first logic gate here, for when invites are accepted, we're going to do a new logic connection on output. We'll come over here and we will reset this logic gate so that we can play it again. Alright, that includes all of the logic set up for the challenge maker to start the game, to end the game, to fail the game, and to successfully complete the game. This last section of the video, I'm going to discuss and demonstrate how you can now test this logic. If you followed my instructional videos up to this point, everything should already be set up and working correctly. So we'll have Luke here and first do a demo a few of these changes that we've made. Another important point is I saved my game, I exited, and I reloaded the level so that I could invoke the level starter. And by doing that, I can demonstrate now that when you're fighting on this escape skip and you hit this target, it's not going to start the explosion sequence of the sail barge because the level starter has closed that logic gate for the explosion sequence. Alright, we'll go ahead and we'll start the challenge. Or actually what I'm demonstrating here is you can enter this and it's not doing any reset logic, which is good. And that's what I'm showing here. So we can see here that 3 players haven't been corrupted, and we only have one Jabba. If I didn't have that reset logic gate closed on the level starter, we'd have multiple Jabbas for each time I entered, or the player enters that trigger area. And that's because we're controlling that through this logic, and that 2 things are required. You have to complete the game, and you have to enter that trigger area. Alright, so let's go ahead this time and let's start the challenge. So we'll get our countdown here. The music will change to the Sarlacc Pit music, which I have turned off right now. This enemy will always be generated every time the plank is extended. I've left that logic the same from this original design. And just going to demonstrate here, if we fall into the pit with our trigger area, we'll get our "so disappointing" message, respawn,
really isn't how I planned it to turn out.
and we'll get our "challenge failed" message. There we go. Challenge failed. And everything is reset. Of course, those logic gates were still closed, therefore we didn't send any signals to reset the replayers or the friend generator for Jabba. Alright, we'll go ahead and we'll start the challenge again, and now we'll test the completing the game logic. So because at this point, you can start the challenge by shooting the trigger. At this point, because we don't have any further enemy waves set up, we have our test buttons over here for the escape skiff. So the one on the left is to start it moving, and the one on the right is the reset button for it. So I'll shoot this button. We'll get our escape skiff. So now when it stops at that path point, that opens the logic gate for the reset logic and the explosion sequence. Now we have our camera views here. First camera following the skiff as it makes its escape, as well as viewing the explosion sequence. And now we get our 360 degrees panoramic camera view. And as it reaches this point here, about 3/4 of the way around the circular path, it starts the 10-second time delayer. It stops here. It'll continue for about another 5 seconds until the time delayer deactivates the camera and sends the signal to complete the game. And we have our successful completion of the challenge. And once again, the logic gate is closed again upon reaching this path points for the reset logic, as well as the explosions logic. So when I hit that target, nothing happens, which is desirable. So now the player has the chance to come back and investigate the debris field, take a closer look, run around. I tried coming up with some logic that would respawn the player back next to the challenge, or back to the starting point, but it just wasn't working out well, and so I left it as is, that you have to run back. And now when we, from our start point here, if we re-enter our trigger area through the logic, and we've met the 2 requirements. We've completed the game. We've now entered the trigger area, which is going to send a signal to the reset logic gate to reset everything. I canceled out of starting the challenge. I could have started the challenge again, but now we see the effects are off. The debris field is below the train again, and our sail barge with Jabba inside and all the replayers have been restored. Alright, in my next video we will set up the basic logic for the rail slides, as well as the time delayer for the extendable plank on the stationary skiff. Until then, thank you again for watching. Feel free to drop a comment down below, and everybody have a great day.